cowhide, bullhide, top grain, full grain, cordovan, alligator, lizard. With so many leathers out there, what kinds are the best for leather accessories? Of course, we've got the answers. Leather accessories have been prominent in every era of menswear. But not all leather is made equal. And if you think you found the best leather for gloves, which is flexible and stretchy, it won't be the best leather for small leather goods, like wallets. You want a leather that has more structure and stays in shape. Only a well-designed and thought-through product made by skilled craftsmen will result in a high-quality leather good. So today's video will provide straightforward advice about which indicators to look for in quality leather and about what leathers are best for what accessories. First up, we got leather cost, which is a good initial indicator of the quality. Now, cost alone doesn't dictate the quality, but there's no such thing as free lunch. And if the leather prices seem too good to be true, they probably are. To illustrate that point, I lead you step by step through this process by comparing what sets a $300 pair of gloves apart from a $30 pair of gloves. In general, it pays to stick with retailers who take the time to explain why their products are worth the price, and not labels who just think their brand alone justifies the cost. Also, be wary of leather that is bargain priced. If the price is cheap, the leather is probably cheap too. And it may not look like it out of the gate, but I've seen great looking leather, especially by Italian tanneries. They take a split hide, add some coating, and it looks great at first, but as you use it, the low grade quality will become obvious and the leather will deteriorate with every day of use. Now, leather is typically sold in square feet or square meters, and there's some outliers when you buy things by the skin. For example, peccary leather is one of those, or alligator or crocodile, which is sold by the width of the skins. You pay a certain amount per centimeter of width. And then there are a number of imperfections that can have a huge impact on the price. So let's say you want a briefcase made of alligator. You know you need something that is quite a bit wider than the case itself. And the skin or hide has to be in pristine condition without flaws. If you use alligator for wallets, you can probably get a similar hide with defects and just cut around them. Not so with a larger piece of leather. The cost is also determined by the animal. So let's take cowhide, for example. You can get it for $3 a square foot, or you can spend $15. What's the difference that justifies a 5x price increase? Well, cowhide is thick and can be split, so the lower layer will be cheaper. And then, of course, the quality of the tanning. How many steps does it take to get the desired result? For example, split leather, the leather fibers are less dense. But certain tanneries have found ways where they can just use heat and pressure and moisture to make the leather a little denser and stronger again. So not all split leathers are alike. There are very nice split suedes, but not all of them are great. Also, the materials and the chemicals used can be more or less expensive, especially in the finishing. The area of the skin that is used for leather goods also makes a huge difference. For example, cowhide shoulders are less expensive than the croupion. The female cows that give birth yield inferior leather because the skin was stretched when giving birth compared to bullhide. So you have more wrinkles, and there is also a different density of the leather fibers. Now, the conditions under which the animals are raised matter too. Cows at elevation are not exposed to mosquito bites, whereas cows from, let's say, South Africa probably have mosquito bites. So either you have more waste that you cut around it, or you have to sand the leather and add an artificial top coating. Top coating will look nice at first, but it will deteriorate over time, and an open pore aniline dyed leather is much more preferable. Now, I could go more into depth as to what aniline leather is versus pigmented leather, but we already did a video about that, so please check out that first. Now, the size of the animal also matters. Calf skin is a good example for it. It's much more expensive than cowhide, but again, the exact price ranges on the tannery. For example, there's a tannery called Haas, the trademark leather called Barenia, and it's used for Hermes leather goods, and it's really, really expensive. So often Hermes gets the full hide, they only use the best piece, and then the rest is sold off as $30 per square foot. Remember, you can get cowhide for $3 a square foot, so it's quite a big difference. So is Barenia a great leather? Absolutely it is. But you can find similar leathers from other tanneries for a lot less. Sometimes you can find leather for $7 a square foot, and it's great calf skin. And you can see a lot goes into the cost of leather. And while a high price is not a guarantee of quality, a low price is a guarantee of inferior quality leather. Let's talk about types of leather. Many leather types can be suited to certain products or uses, and not all leathers are suited for everything. We also did a video about the truth in leather, where we talk about countries of origin, tanning, dyeing, finishing, construction, and so forth. So if you're interested in that stuff, check it out. Frankly, it can be really difficult for the untrained eye to determine leather types with a naked eye, or even what parts they're from. And even if you can, you need to know if an item is also suited for this particular use case. For example, bridle leather. It's a nice leather, it's treated with wax, and it's traditionally used for anything related to horse, right? There, the best part is probably the butt area. It has the fewest creases. If you get the shoulder, you get a lot more creases. It's still nice if you like that, but it just looks different. So for cowhide or calfskin, the coupon, which is the center part, is typically the best part. Now for alligator, you want the belly part, except if you like hornback on your leather goods, then you go with the back. So a good retailer will provide you with more detailed information about the leather and won't just say it's the finest leather available. At Fort Belvedere, we're obsessed with quality. So when you buy something from us, you know it's top-notch stuff. Why? Because we tested it and we don't skimp on materials. Now, of course, the best way to learn about leathers is to go to a tannery, go to a manufacturer and see how that works. But chances are you will not have the opportunity to do that, because it's not like you can just walk in there and see how they do things. So it's our goal to show you as much as we can in our videos. And I can say from personal experience, it's quite a feat to learn about leather, and it has taken me years, and I don't know everything there is to know. Also, you have to make a product first in order to know for sure whether it's great for this particular use case and applications. In short, you have to make all the mistakes first before you know what the best way to make something is and what the best leather is to use for that particular thing. Fortunately, we work with seasoned, experienced manufacturers who've done this craft for generations, and so they can help us make fewer mistakes, but we still have to test our prototypes rigorously, so once we have a product, we know the quality is top-notch, and there's no things that will come haunt you down the line. So the question then becomes is, how can you identify a good quality leather good? First of all, there's the appearance, right? Look for a grain and open pores. You can use a loupe for that. For example, in our Togo leather, you can see that it's grained, right? Obviously grained. And you could say, well, I've seen grained leather many times. But the way the grain at Fort Belvedere is developed is by treating the entire skin and basically shrinking it down. So it's a natural grain. As you look at the entire skin, you can see there are areas where there's a smaller grain, and then you can see areas where there's a much larger grain. Typically, when you have a piece of leather or a leather accessory, it's cut from a certain area, so you won't necessarily see that. So if you never have the chance to see the full skin, you don't see that either. And of course, when we cut our leather goods like a wallet, we try to use scales and grains of the same size so it doesn't look odd. Now, most other grained leather, on the other hand, is actually debossed with a stamp. So if you see a pattern that looks very uniform, chances are it's just debossed with a stamp. Sometimes the leather is also treated on top, so you don't really see the real leather anymore. Now, on a larger duffel bag, for example, you can truly see if the grain is all the same or if there's slight variances. If there's no variance, then it's a debossed leather. Why would you do that? Well, it's a lot cheaper to produce. So sometimes you can think, oh, this grained leather costs a lot less than this grained leather. Chances are there are things like that that are not immediately obvious. Even if the leather doesn't have any grains, take a loupe and see if you can see fine pores. If you don't, the top layer was probably pigmented or treated, and that often means, a second grade or third grade leather was used to hide the defects. So then there's also semi-aniline dyed leather, and at first it may look fine, but over time it will just wear differently and deteriorate more quickly. It's especially true for pigmented leather. You can find some very high quality aniline dyed and even semi-aniline dyed leather. So if the leather was not aniline dyed and the leather has a different color in the top coat, if you wear it, you will now see a lighter color from underneath, which doesn't look very pleasing. Maybe you come across stuff like carbon leather, but likely this is actually a split leather with like a PU coating on top of it. So it's actually a very low cost item, and it doesn't have anything to do with real carbon, which is often quite expensive. Just think about your cars. So one thing to keep in mind is if you see leather that is heavily coated, that is a hallmark for a low quality, because you would never do that with a high quality leather. So apart from appearance, the next thing to look at is texture. And here you don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. For example, for gloves, you want something that's soft, supple, and stretchy, so you can move your fingers freely. On the other hand, that very same leather would not be great for a wallet. It would be too soft, it would be too stretchy, it'd show wrinkles, and it would age prematurely. The same is true for belts. You don't want something that is too soft. For small leather goods, they typically can be reinforced with a backing, so that allows you to use a wider range of leathers, because the backing acts as the agent that provides the required stiffness. Of course, when you hold a leather good in your hand, it's impossible to know if there's a backing, if the leather was split down and there's multiple layers. This is something maybe the manufacturer can tell you, or you can figure it out when you cut products apart, as we did in our channel before. We cut apart wallets, we cut apart belts. So if you're interested in that, check out those videos. Now, apart from texture and appearance, there's also the smell. Leather should smell like, well, leather, but not all leather smells the same. There are some that are heavily waxed and oiled. Sometimes they use birch oil. It smells very smoky. So there is not a one-size-fits-all smell description that you should look for. Also, when items are glued and they may be freshly glued, you may smell the glue, which is normal. Most leather goods have some use of glue, so layers don't shift. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad product. Typically, though, between the time a leather good is made and when you get it in a store, the bad smell from the glue should have dissipated. If you smell anything like chemical or painty or anything like a non-leather, it's a good indicator that this may not be the best leather. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of leather accessories, let's talk about today's outfit. I'm wearing a Belstaff leather jacket, and I made an entire Is It Worth It video about it. I'm wearing a wool sweater, which is vintage from Ralph Lauren, a blue striped shirt from Eton without any neckwear. I'm wearing a belt from the belt system of Fort Belvedere. It's one of those beautiful, natural bull hide belts of a German leather. And if you look, it was treated with waxes. It is made from the neck and the shoulder leather, so you see these wrinkles, but as I move the belt, you can see the different tones. It works well with my jacket as well as with my leather boots. They're Jodhpur boots from Scarosso. My pants are burgundy corduroys from Fort Belvedere, and my socks are shadow striped socks in navy and red, also from Fort Belvedere. I'm wearing a little pinky ring that I found secondhand. It's silver with some tiger's eye, but it's quite matte. Accessory-wise, I have a card holder from Fort Belvedere that holds all the things I need. My scent today is 17 Rosso, or 17 Rosso, which is a wonderful item from Roberto Ugolini. Because I'm wearing a sterling silver ring, I chose a silver buckle for the belt. If I wear gold items, I can also choose a gold buckle. That's the advantage of the system. Any buckle works with any belt, and that's how we designed it. Great for travel, but also just for everyday use. If you have 3 buckles and 3 belts, that's 9 combinations right there. Now, having covered leathers in general, let's look a little more closely at specific accessories and which leather qualities are best for certain things. So for gloves, for example, you always want a leather that is super stretchy and supple, because the gloves are supposed to, protect your hands, keep them warm, but you can have glove materials that are non-leather. For dress gloves, that's typically not something you want because you don't want to be sweaty. And leather is really nice at regulating that temperature. They're breathable, but also keep you warm. Now, most men's gloves for winter are lined with wool or cashmere, and then you can also get fur linings, or like rabbit fur, or sheepskin, for example. Now, there's also a decorative element about gloves that make you look good. It's almost like the effortless elegance of yesteryear was definitely owed in part to the nice gloves men wore back then. I'd say today the most popular leather for gloves in general is probably cowhide. It's used because it's very common, it's inexpensive, but it's not particularly stretchy or supple or soft, so I personally would not wear gloves made out of that leather. There's deerskin, on the other hand, which is a good leather. It's soft, it's durable, it has some nice texture, and you can make a good pair of gloves out of it. There's also goat leather, right? It's also very soft. It's not very durable, though. And sheep leather, on the other hand, is more durable than goat leather. You'll have shearling, which is tanned with the wool still on, and while it's very warm, it's very bulky. So I suggest you only get these type of gloves if you want something that's warm and more casual. If you want finer looking gloves, go with hair sheep, for example. It's soft, it's thin, it's supple, it's also strong. It's a great glove leather. Then there's pig leather, which is also good glove material, but you can see the creases over time. And it's increasingly hard to find. It's also not as good as peccary. In my opinion, peccary leather is by far the best glove leather in existence. So why is that? Well, first of all, it's soft. It's stretchy, it gets softer with age, and it develops a beautiful patina. It also has this particular three-pronged design that's similar to pigskin, but different. The leather is extremely tough. Even if the stitching will, wear down after 20 years, you can actually re-sew that leather because it's so good. The downside is the leather is really expensive, and it keeps getting more expensive. Why, you might ask? Well, it's from a wild animal. So it's regulated by CITES, which is an organization that makes sure that no animals are harmed or brought to extinction. However, this also requires that there is a paper trail from where everything came from along the line, so exporting and importing becomes a lot more difficult, and so the price goes up there too. And because the skins come from wild animals, you will have a lot more imperfections, scars, scratches, and all those things. But that's part of the natural beauty of peccary. It shows that it comes from a truly wild animal, which is typically a better quality than if you have the skin from a domesticated animal. It's durable, but it's pliable and soft. It's strong, but it looks beautiful. It has this more casual texture, and overall, to me, peccary is the king of glove leather. And if you want to learn more about it, we got a whole video about it. Of course, not everyone can afford peccary gloves, and also if you want a finer glove that is more elegant, go with something like hair sheep or maybe lamb nappa. These skins are typically quite a bit thinner, and therefore you can make a more elegant glove. At Fort Belvedere, we found that lamb nappa is a really nice material, so we love to work with it. It makes beautiful gloves, and they're just slimmer than our peccary styles. You can also get evening gloves, which are really nice to upgrade your tuxedo outfit, and there you want an even thinner skin. And lamb nappa can be split, but of course, the thinner you make the skin, the less durable the glove will be. But for evening gloves, you don't need durable gloves. It's not like you do any physical labor. You need something that just looks good, and when you walk in, it goes into your overcoat pocket, and that's the end of the use for the evening. To learn more about the varieties of gloves, the hallmarks of good gloves, and all that stuff, we got a video for you. Another accessory that's really popular with men is probably a belt. It is, for a lot of men, essential to keep their pants up, unless they use suspenders. And even on suspenders, you may have little parts of leather too. But belts are typically, heavy use, heavy wear, will be worn most days. So you need a leather that is really made for this task. It also can't be too stiff, but if it's too soft, it stretches out and bends, which is not ideal. The most common leather for belts is cowhides. But again, not all cowhide is alike. First of all, you can have a belt from a single piece of leather, and in the German language, we actually have different words for that type of a belt versus a belt that has 2 or 3 different leathers. When you have a single piece, you can edge paint, you can burnish the edges, you can leave them raw and unfinished. You just punch in a few holes and you add a buckle and your belt is done. Fairly simple. Then you can make a belt, that has 2 different layers of leather or even 3 different layers of leather. And often what you do depends on the thickness of leather that you have. When you have a thick leather, you can always split it down. When you have thinner leathers, you can't make them bigger. You have to use multiple layers. Now, of course, if you have to sew them together, there's more work involved. So the workmanship and the cost of producing them goes up. How thick a leather actually is depends on how the cow or bull aged, what they ate, what environment they grew up in. And so the best tanneries typically have the thickest cowhides available. And when you get something that's so beautiful, the question is, do you want to split it down or not? And also sometimes, maybe the butt area is thicker than the neck area, for example. So you can figure out from what area of the height do I use something to create something. For example, at Fort Belvedere, right, we want belts that have a certain thickness so they work with every single buckle. So we have to make sure that no matter how many layers we use, we get to the desired thickness overall. Also, layering allows you to use different leathers for different purposes. For example, on the inside, on the lining, we use a Saffiano leather, which doesn't color off. It's pre-creased, so you don't get any unexpected wrinkles or creases, and so it's ideal as the lining leather on the inside. If we have thinner calfskin, for example, we even use a third layer to provide a certain element of stability and longevity, all the while you can have the nice polished look of calfskin. You can also do things like creating a double-sided belt where you use two outside leathers, and so if you travel, it's nice to have maybe a brown and a black belt in one, and you just have to bring one. The look that you're going for also impacts the choice of the leather. Cowhide and bullhide generally have larger pores. Calfskin, on the other hand, is a smaller pore. Bison, for example, has these really deep wrinkles and looks a lot more casual. Then if you want things like cordovan leather or alligator leather, typically if you take a look at the belt, you will see that it's pieced together out of multiple pieces because the shell cordovan piece, it's a small piece. It's never the length of a full belt, so you have to do that. And for alligator too, it's super expensive to get one and cut just one belt out of a big skin. It would be a really expensive belt, so using maybe a smaller skin and cutting pieces is a lot more cost effective. So why are such huge price differences for belts, even though they're all made of cowhide? Well, again, a cheap belt is usually made of top-coated, split leather, and belts are common items, so people don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money on them. But those belts don't really stand a test of time. You'll have to replace them more often. The holes wear out, the edge paint comes off, it just doesn't look nice, and they're very kind of bent and not pleasing to look at, which also, wastes money in the long term, of course. More expensive belts will also have more details in the workmanship. It's not just about the leather, right? You have the stitching. You have maybe sometimes hand sewing. You have folded edges, burnished edges, edge painting. All that stuff goes into it. You have thoughtful details. For example, for Belvedere, we have diamond-shaped holes, so it's easier when you open and close the belt. They're more expensive to produce than round holes, for example, because you have to align everything really neatly, and if it's off, you can't use that belt anymore. Also, we add a little line along the edge, which makes it really nice next to the stitching. It's something that Hermes does, right? But their belts are like $800 plus. And then, of course, you can buy a belt at Costco or Walmart that costs you less than $20. Also, if you get leather from, let's say, Mexico, South Africa, or India, chances are it's less expensive because they have a lower GDP there. They have different environmental regulations than, let's say, in the US, in Germany, in England, or Italy. Then there's also the element of, tanning as a tradition and the family recipe and the know-how and getting a certain property and also a consistency. For example, when we originally started with peccary leather, we thought, these animals come from Peru, so let's tan and dye the leather there because then there's no degradation in the skins. Well, turns out, every batch was different because they just didn't have the right recipes and they didn't know how to output a consistently soft peccary leather that always looks the same. So now we'll have them, basically made into crust leather. Then it's brought to Germany and it's re-tanned there and re-dyed. So the finish is always the same and it's very consistent. Now, what about the leather used for wallets or like coin purses or other mid-sized leather goods, like maybe a cufflink case? If you think of your sole leather, sometimes that's cowhide that would be way too stiff for a wallet. You want something that it has a certain structure, but it's not too stiff. Lamb nappa, on the other hand, is nice and soft, but for a wallet, it's not really suited. It would wear out prematurely. Now, cowhide is quite thick, and if you have multiple layers of leather, you actually get a wallet that is really thick, and if you put stuff into it, it's super big in your pocket, and that's not what you want. So you can either use fabric on the inside to make it thinner, or you have to split the leather. At Fort Belvedere, for example, we decided to make an all-leather wallet. So you have, the entire lining is leather and the outside is leather. So you have 6 layers of leather versus a traditional wallet, maybe just have 2 layers of leather. So from the outside, you could not tell that one wallet has 2.5 to 3 times as much leather as the other one. But if you want something that's truly good, you also have to split it and make it extremely thin. Otherwise, you have this big chunky wallet that may be out of all leather, but it's not really helpful. You can also use things like elk or deer. You can use alligator, ostrich, lizard, or other exotic leathers. If you want to learn more about wallets and the hallmarks, we got a video on cheap versus expensive wallets for you. The same, of course, also applies to like passport holders. Really think about, your business card case, your manicure set, your pen case, your watch case, and so forth. All these things are great leather goods. Basically, anything you need to carry around in your everyday life or things on your desk will always look good in leather. So also, when you create a leather good, you have to consider the design and how it interacts with a leather. For example, when we created a pen case, we didn't want the pen to just slide out when you opened it, because accidentally it would, drop on the floor, maybe get damaged. And so we chose leathers and we tested them that they would be grippy enough to hold the pen inside, even if I opened it and held it upside down and shook it a little bit. At the same time, I wanted something that you could easily take out without having to apply force. The specific design of the pouch impacts also how grippy the leather will be. So it all has to work together. And similarly, when we worked on watch cases, we wanted something that kept the watch securely inside and protected at all times. So it couldn't wiggle around. And when you opened it, we didn't just want it to accidentally drop on the floor, because your expensive timepiece should not be damaged in such a way. So, we carefully tested different materials. We had tweed, we had alcantara, they were way too slippery. Suede, on the other hand, had exactly the right grippiness, but there's different kinds of suede. There's longer naps, there's shorter naps. So finally, we found a suede that worked really, really well. It grabbed the watch at all times, and it was very easy to remove it, nevertheless. And then, we wanted a leather piece on the inside and ensure that no matter what the size of your strap was and your wrist, you could have one piece of leather that kept your watch in there securely. And so we realized we needed something that was a little stiffer. So we worked with a stiffener on the inside, but the edge had to be softer. So, little changes in the size of your watch strap and your watch itself wouldn't be a problem, and it would truly work with all watches. So you can see there is the design aspect and the leathers, and you have to find a way to all make it work together. Personally, I'm a big fan of exotic leathers, and there's plenty of options out there, right? For some people, cordovan has become very popular, but there's, lizard, alligator. There's even things like elephant, and all of these can be fantastic. And I think we have dedicated videos about cordovan and alligator. I also think ostrich is really nice. Most people think of it as that pebbled leather, but there's also the leg leather, which has more of a dinosaur look in my mind, but it can look really, really cool. Again, there's no CETUS restrictions for alligator, so it's a very controlled leather. You know exactly where it came from. In my experience, most people think exotic leathers as very expensive and also delicate leathers, but both ostrich and alligator are actually quite durable. Exotic leathers are typically a lot more expensive, and so often you will only find them for custom-made products because they're expensive to stock. Horsehide, non-cordovan horsehide, can also be an interesting leather. For example, the Shot Perfecto leather jacket was originally made of that, and we also have an Is It Worth It about that. In recent years, I think cordovan, especially from Hawaii and Chicago, has become increasingly popular. Personally, I don't like the way it wears on shoes, the way it bulges, the way it creases, but some people really, really love it. So at this point, it can be as expensive as lesser expensive alligator leather. So you have to decide what you want to go for. If you're really interested in exotics, there's really cool fish leather from salmon or Amazon fish, reindeer, and then other types of leathers. Leave us a comment and I can make a video about that. So what about vegan leather? We have a whole dedicated video on the comparison of vegan leather to, real leather. And we've found that vegan leather, leather or vegan substitute cannot compare at all to real leather. And therefore, we don't think it's a good choice for any type of leather good. So unless you're ethically opposed to using animals, I would say stay clear of vegan leather because it doesn't even come close to the real thing. So hopefully you've learned a thing or two about leather when it's used in accessories, what matters, and how you can identify quality. So what leathers have served you well for your accessories, and maybe what accessories would you like to see from Fort Belvedere? Let us know in the comments below.